Her designs were stolen. Her sister's life hung by a thread. Alara, a desperate seamstress, was forced into the city's dark underbelly. There, she shattered a priceless mask, catching the cold, assessing gaze of a stranger surrounded by money and guns. He was Dante Alessio, the mafia boss. He didn't just save her. He ruthlessly claimed her world, her art, her very soul. Now caught in his dangerous web, would she find redemption or become his ultimate obsession? The thread on Alara Vance's needle gleamed under the single, anemic bulb hanging precariously above her workstation. It was past midnight, and the grand majestic theater, a skeletal husk of its former glory, was utterly silent save for the groan of ancient pipes and the rhythmic whir of her antique sewing machine. Dust motes danced in the weak light, illuminated every flaw, every tear in the velvet drapes, every chipped cherub on the proscenium arch. This place, once a beacon of artistry, now felt like a tomb, slowly suffocating the very essence of her soul. Alara adjusted the intricate lace cuff she was painstakingly attaching to a theatrical gown, a garish monstrosity for Mr. Silas's latest masterpiece, a farce he'd plagiarized from a forgotten French playwright. Her fingers, nimble and accustomed to the delicate dance of fabric, moved with an almost automatic precision. She could have designed something truly breathtaking with this material, spun a narrative with every stitch, brought a character to life not just through words, but through texture and form. Instead, she was mending holes in someone else's faded vision, quite literally. A tremor of exhaustion ran through her. Her shoulders ached, constant companion to the perpetual hunch over her sewing machine. The smell of old wood, stale dust, and cheap theatrical makeup clung to the air, a scent that had once filled her with youthful excitement but now only evoked a crushing weariness. She glanced at the crumpled sketch lying discarded beside her, of a vibrant, audacious design for an immersive experience, a dream weaver's ball, where the audience would move through ever-changing, fantastical costumes and sets. It was her magnum opus, her hidden sanctuary, a vivid escape from the dreary reality that pressed down on her. Pointless, she murmured, the word a bitter whisper against the silence. It was just a sketch, an impossible whisper of a dream that would never see the light beyond her threadbare sketchbook. Her mind drifted to the bills stacked on her tiny kitchen counter at home. Not just rent, but the growing medical expenses for her younger sister, Lena. Lena, whose cough seemed to worsen with every passing season, whose bright eyes often dulled with pain. Alara was Lena's sole caregiver, her only family in this sprawling, indifferent city. Every stitch she made, every sleepless night she endured, was for Lena. But the meager wages Mr. Silas paid her barely covered the bare necessities, let alone the specialized treatment Lena truly needed. The fear for her sister was a cold, constant knot in Alara's stomach, tightening with each unpaid invoice. Mr. Silas. The name itself brought a sour taste to her mouth. A portly, perpetually sweating man with a booming voice and a laugh that grated on the nerves. He was a caricature of an impresario, all bluster and no substance. He owned the Grand Majestic, or what was left of it, a decaying relic clinging to the fringes of the city's vibrant arts scene. His business acumen mostly involved borrowing heavily and charming investors with promises he never kept. And when the charm wore thin, he resorted to more unsavory methods. Alara knew her designs, her original, heartfelt creations, often found their way into his pitches, presented as his own stroke of genius. She'd once confronted him, a flash of righteous anger overcoming her usual meekness. He'd merely smiled, a condescending, predatory curve of his lips. "My dear Alara," he'd said, his voice dripping with false concern, "talented as you are, one must understand the realities of this industry. You have no network, no capital, no name. I provide the stage, the materials, the opportunity. And let's not forget, my dear, your rather delicate immigration status. Without my sponsorship, where would you be? Back across the border? With your ailing sister." The words had struck her like a physical blow, leaving her breathless and humiliated. The unspoken threat, cold and absolute, had silenced her then and ever since. Her visa was tied to the theater, to him. He held her future and Lena's in his sweaty, grasping hands. It was a gilded cage, the theater, beautiful on the surface, but slowly grinding her down into nothingness. She pressed the cool fabric to her cheek, drawing a shuddering breath. The silk, a remnant from a truly magnificent costume she designed years ago, still held a ghost of its original vibrancy. It was for a character that dared to dream, a queen who defied her oppressors. Alara felt a pang of longing so sharp it was almost physical. She craved that audacity, that freedom. She was a creator, a weaver of beauty, yet she felt like a ghost, haunting the edges of a world she desperately wanted to belong to. The sewing machine finally whirred to a halt. The dress was finished. Another piece of her soul poured into a work that would be credited to someone else, another dream deferred. She stood, stretching her aching back, and walked to the dusty window overlooking the city street. Rain had begun to fall, a persistent, cold drizzle that mirrored the ache in her heart. The neon signs of the city blurred into streaks of garish color, indifferent to the silent suffering within the theater's walls. She thought of the rumors that swirled around Mr. Silas, whispered among the few remaining staff members. Whispers of shady dealings, of late-night meetings in the theater's basement, where a more exclusive, illicit club was said to operate. The Crimson Club, they called it. A place where fortunes were made and lost in the blink of an eye, where men in expensive suits played for stakes far higher than she could ever comprehend. A dangerous place. A place Mr. Silas visited far too often, always returning with either a wild, manic gleam in his eyes or a look of utter, desperate panic. A sudden sharp rap on her workshop door startled her. Her heart leaped into her throat. No one ever disturbed her this late. She slowly turned, a pair of fabric shears instinctively grasped in her trembling hand. The door creaked open, revealing Mr. Silas's florid face, sweat beading on his forehead despite the cool night. His eyes were wide, bloodshot, and frantic. "Alara, thank God you're still here," he panted, stepping inside, his perfume a cloying mix of cheap cologne and desperation. "I need your help. A matter of utmost urgency. The fate of the Majestic, and perhaps your future, depends on it." Alara's grip tightened on the shears. The scent of fear, raw and palpable, clung to him, mixing with the stale air of the theater. She knew, with a chilling certainty that settled deep in her bones, that whatever he needed, it would drag her even further into the abyss she so desperately fought to escape. She just didn't know how deep that abyss truly went, or what kind of monster awaited her at its bottom. Mr. Silas's words, heavy with desperation and the stench of stale alcohol, still echoed in Alara's ears. "The mask, Alara. The antique opera mask. It's in a private vault deep beneath the club. Collateral. You must get it back. Tonight. Or your sister's medical bills, your visa. They all disappear." His face, a mask of sheer terror, had contorted into a desperate plea that held all the implicit menace of a true threat. The rain outside intensified, a relentless drumming against her small apartment window, mirroring the frantic beat of her heart. She stared at the single, heavy keycard Silas had pressed into her hand, its cool plastic a chilling contrast to the clammy sweat on her palm. "Crimson Club Access, Level 3, the faint inscription read. A shudder ran through her. She had heard the whispers, of course. The Grand Majestic wasn't just a theater. It was a front, a decaying facade for something far more sinister burrowed beneath its foundations. The Crimson Club, a name spoken in hushed tones, a place where fortunes were built on whispers and destroyed by a glance. Fear, cold and sharp, coiled in her stomach, but beneath it a desperate resolve ignited. Lena. Her sister's pale, fragile face flashed in her mind. Lena depended on her, and Alara would crawl through fire if it meant securing her sister's future. This was not about a mask. It was about survival. Clutching the keycard, Alara slipped out of her apartment building and into the brutal embrace of the storm. The city at night was a different beast, shadows deepening, sounds muffled by the downpour. Each gust of wind felt like a push, propelling her towards the unknown. The Grand Majestic loomed, darker and more ominous than usual, its grand entrance gate chained shut. She had to use the service entrance, a nondescript steel door hidden in a grimy alley, a path usually reserved for delivery trucks and discarded dreams. The air inside the deserted theater was thick with the scent of damp, ancient velvet and a metallic tang she couldn't quite place. Her footsteps echoed hollowly as she navigated the familiar backstage labyrinth, now imbued with a menacing stillness. The stage, usually a vibrant hub of activity, was a vast, dark maw. Her hands, usually so steady with a needle, trembled as she slid the keycard into a hidden slot beside an unmarked elevator door. A soft click, a hum of unseen machinery, and the heavy doors slid open, revealing a descent into darkness. The elevator car smelled faintly of expensive cigar smoke and something else, something clean and vaguely antiseptic, a sharp contrast to the theater's musty scent. The descent was slow, agonizingly so, each floor number glowing a sickly green before disappearing. When it finally chimed and opened, Alara was greeted not by the dusty chaos of a theatrical basement, but by a corridor bathed in a warm, inviting glow. It was a stark, jarring transformation. The air here was thicker, imbued with the rich, heady aroma of aged whiskey, polished leather, and a sophisticated cologne that hinted at untold wealth. Soft jazz music, barely a whisper, seeped from behind heavy, lacquered doors. This was not the Grand Majestic. This was the Crimson Club. Her eyes, wide with a mixture of terror and reluctant awe, scanned the opulent hallway. Dark wood paneling gleamed, reflecting the subtle glow of strategically placed sconces. Thick, plush carpet muffled her already tentative footsteps. Every detail spoke of understated luxury, a stark contrast to the threadbare existence she knew. She found the vault door, a formidable steel slab disguised behind an innocuous painting. Another keycard swipe, another soft hum. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. Inside, the vault was a smaller, equally opulent space, filled with glass display cases holding antique jewelry, rare coins, and, yes, a collection of theatrical props, all incredibly valuable. There, nestled on a velvet cushion, was the ornate, bejeweled opera mask Mr. Silas had described. It pulsed with a forgotten grandeur, its crimson and gold enamels shimmering in the dim light. Reaching for it, Alara felt a strange sense of disquiet. This wasn't merely a prop. It was a piece of art, imbued with its own history. As her fingers brushed the cool, smooth surface, a distant voice, low and resonant, echoed from a slightly ajar door at the far end of the vault. Her blood ran cold. She wasn't alone. Panic, hot and suffocating, seized her. She snatched the mask, clutching it like a lifeline, and froze, listening intently. The voice was calm, almost melodic, but carried an undeniable weight of authority. Italian, she thought, or perhaps a dialect. Her heart was a drum in her ears, making it hard to discern words, only tones. A muffled clink of glasses, a soft shuffle of feet. She had to get out. No. Turning to retrace her steps, she barely noticed the heavy mahogany door just a few feet away that stood slightly open, revealing a sliver of a dimly lit room. She assumed it led to another storage area, another part of the vault. Desperate to escape, she practically lunged for it, pushing it open wider without a moment's thought. The scene that unfolded before her stole her breath, freezing her mid-step. This was no storage room. This was an office, or perhaps a private study, that exuded an atmosphere of raw, unadulterated power. Rich, dark wood lined the walls, a massive, ornate desk dominated the center, gleaming under the soft glow of a single antique brass lamp. The air here was even heavier with the scent of expensive whiskey and an unmistakably masculine cologne, dry cedar, and something akin to cold winter air. And at the desk, completely alone, sat him. Dante Alessio. He wasn't looking at her. He was leaning back in his chair, one arm casually draped over the back, the other resting on the polished surface of the desk. His dark hair was slicked back, accentuating the sharp angles of his formidable face. He was dressed in an impeccably tailored charcoal gray suit that seemed to have been sculpted to his powerful frame. His eyes, the color of obsidian, were fixed on a stack of neatly bundled cash piled high beside him, alongside a silver, gleaming handgun. It rested there, openly, casually, as if it were merely another desk accessory. Two men stood a respectful distance away, their backs to Alara, engaged in hushed conversation, but their silence was absolute. The room was tense, brimming with an unspoken authority that radiated from Dante Alessio like a tangible force field. He radiated a calm, lethal efficiency that made her feel instantly, utterly exposed. Her hands, already clammy, lost their grip. The antique opera mask, the object of her terrified quest, slipped from her trembling fingers. It hit the thick rug with a soft thud, then rolled, striking the leg of the desk with a sharp, sickening crack. A small, delicate piece of crimson enamel chipped off, revealing the dark wood beneath. The sound, though minor, was deafening in the oppressive silence. Dante's head snapped up. His obsidian eyes, sharp and predatory, cut through the dim light, locking onto her. There was no surprise in them, only an immediate, piercing assessment. He didn't flinch, didn't move, yet his stillness was more terrifying than any sudden movement. He simply looked at her, his gaze stripping away every pretense, every layer of her carefully constructed invisibility. One of the men turned, a flicker of alarm in his eyes, but Dante merely raised a hand, a silent command that stopped them instantly. He said nothing, simply held her in his unyielding gaze, his expression unreadable. Then his voice, low and resonant, sliced through the air, carrying the weight of command and danger. It was smooth, an accent woven into the vowels, making the simple query sound like a death sentence. "Who are you?" It wasn't a question that sought information. It was a declaration of ownership, a challenge, and a chilling recognition. Alara felt utterly naked, her soul laid bare under his intense, assessing stare. Every insecurity, every fear, every desperate hope she harbored felt exposed. She stood there, frozen, the broken mask at her feet, a silent testament to her intrusion into a world she never should have seen. And in that moment, she knew with a horrifying certainty that her life, as she knew it, was irrevocably over. The chill of the rain had seeped into Alara's bones, but it was nothing compared to the icy dread that had taken root in her chest. She had somehow stumbled her way back from the suffocating opulence of the Crimson Club, her mind a tangled knot of fear and bewildering images. The memory of Dante Alessio's eyes, those bottomless pools of obsidian that had stripped her bare, burned behind her eyelids. His voice, a low, dangerous rumble that had vibrated through the very floorboards, echoed in her skull. "Who are you?" She remembered little of the journey home, only the frantic thrum of her own pulse, the relentless drumming of the rain against her umbrella, and the phantom scent of cedar and danger clinging to her clothes. The chipped opera mask lay on her kitchen table now, a broken artifact of her terrifying trespass. It felt like a warning, a physical manifestation of the cracks she'd made in the carefully constructed wall of her mundane existence. Days bled into a blur of restless sleep and waking anxiety. Every shadow seemed to lengthen. Every sudden noise made her jump. She found herself constantly scanning the streets, an irrational fear of seeing a dark, unmarked car, or a figure too perfectly tailored, too utterly still. Dante Alessio was a phantom, yet his presence was more solid, more consuming than any living person she knew. He was a whisper in the back of her mind, a tremor beneath her skin. Meanwhile, Mr. Silas's desperation escalated into a fever pitch. He was a man drowning, and he was dragging Alara down with him. The Grand Majestic, already gasping for air, now felt like a sinking ship. Silas's gambling losses had evidently piled higher, cementing his fate even deeper within Dante's ominous world. One sweltering afternoon, Silas cornered Alara in the dusty backstage corridor, his usually florid face pale and slick with sweat. His breath, hot and foul, carried the stale odor of desperation. "Alara," he hissed, grabbing her arm, his grip surprisingly strong. "Alessio, he's calling in the markers. He wants his money. And he wants assets. Ilara's stomach clenched. What assets, Mr. Silas? I have nothing. His eyes, darting nervously around the empty corridor, narrowed. Oh, but you do, my dear. Your talents, your creations, and that rather inconvenient little sister of yours whose visa is, shall we say, rather flexible without my continued support. He leaned in, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial, venomous whisper. Alessio isn't a man one bargains with, Ilara. He takes. And if he decides that you are part of what he's owed, then, well, you'll be a very valuable asset indeed. The words struck her like a volley of icy darts. Not just her visa, but Lena. He was using Lena as a shield, a weapon against her. A wave of nauseating fury mixed with overwhelming helplessness washed over her. She tried to pull her arm away, but his grip tightened, bruising. Don't look at me like that, girl, he snarled, his eyes glinting with a feral desperation. I'm merely explaining the realities. You belong to the Majestic, and the Majestic, it seems, now belongs to Mr. Alessio. You do well to remember that. He released her abruptly, leaving a burning imprint on her skin. Then, as quickly as he'd appeared, he scurried away, a pathetic, terrified rodent. Ilara stood there, trembling, the scent of his fear and her own humiliation clinging to her. She had to do something. She couldn't let Silas use Lena, couldn't let Dante Alessio, whoever he truly was, lay claim to her life. In a desperate, futile attempt, she sought legal counsel. She scoured online directories, making discreet phone calls, hoping for a glimmer of hope. Most lawyers either dismissed her outright, finding her tale of a mafia boss and a gambling theater owner too outlandish, or worse, saw her desperation as an opportunity. One particularly slick, expensively dressed lawyer in a gleaming downtown office listened with a condescending smirk, then quoted her a fee that would empty her meager savings for Lena's treatments. My dear Miss Vance, he purred, lounging back in his leather chair, these matters are delicate and expensive. Perhaps you should consider a less confrontational approach. Some debts, once incurred, are best repaid, especially when dealing with certain influential individuals. His implication was clear. She was a pawn, and the game was rigged. She left his office feeling even more exposed, the city's justice system an impenetrable wall against her. It was then that Dante's subtle interventions began. Ilara arrived at her workstation one morning to find a carefully packaged box waiting for her. Inside, neatly folded, was the roll of exquisite crimson silk she'd ordered weeks ago, the very silk Mr. Silas had lost and then blamed her for, claiming a supplier dispute. Its texture was impossibly soft beneath her fingertips, its color a rich, dark blood red that seemed to pulse with life. Ilara stared at it, her mind reeling. How? Silas certainly hadn't bought it. He was drowning. And who else would know she needed this specific fabric? A cold shiver, not entirely unpleasant, traced its way down her spine. Someone was watching. Someone was helping. A few days later, a delivery arrived at her tiny apartment. A small, unassuming box. Inside, nestled among dark green foliage, was a single, perfect bouquet of deep red roses. No card, no sender. Just the velvet softness of the petals, the rich, earthy fragrance, and the thorns sharp and hidden. She stared at them, a strange mix of fear and a fragile, illicit warmth blooming in her chest. Red roses, a symbol of passion, of desire, of ownership. Could it be Dante? The thought was both terrifying and undeniably thrilling. Had he seen something in her that night beyond a clumsy intruder? Had he claimed her even then? Her heart began to beat a new, unsettling rhythm. She was being protected, yes, but by whom? And for what purpose? This wasn't protection born of altruism. It was possession. The stolen fabric, the roses, they were whispers of power, subtle declarations from a world she barely understood. She was no longer just a Lara Vance, the exploited seamstress. She was becoming something else, something caught in a dangerous web woven by an unseen hand. She was being drawn into a deal a silent, terrifying arrangement that she hadn't agreed to, but from which there seemed no escape. A terrifying thought blossomed in her mind, taking root deeply and firmly. Dante Alessio wasn't just observing her, he was claiming her. And a part of her, a reckless, desperate part, found herself wondering, what would it truly mean to belong to a man like him? What would he demand? And what, if anything, would she have left of herself once he was done? The answer, she knew, would shatter whatever fragile sense of control she desperately clung to. The crumpled notice lay on Alera's meager kitchen table, a stark, formal document proclaiming the transfer of ownership of the Grand Majestic Theater. It was signed by a formidable legal firm, bearing the Alessio family crest, a stylized lion roaring over a Roman column, and beneath it, the chillingly elegant signature of Dante Alessio. Mr. Silas, it seemed, had been utterly and completely extinguished. Not with violence, not with public outcry, but with a silent, ruthless efficiency that spoke volumes more than any public execution. He had simply disappeared, leaving behind only this paper and a pervasive silence. A shiver, part relief, part dread, ran down Alera's spine. The man truly was a ghost in the city's shadows, capable of erasing a person as effortlessly as one deletes a file. Her fear of Silas had been replaced by something far more profound, a chilling awe for the man who now held her fate and Lena's so completely in his grasp. A week later, a dark sedan, immaculately polished, pulled up outside her modest apartment building. The driver, a formidable man with eyes that missed nothing, emerged and politely informed her that Mr. Alessio had arranged for her new accommodations. He called it an operational necessity, citing the demands of the Grand Majestic's extensive renovation. Her new apartment was a stark contrast to the cramped, dust-filled space she'd left behind. It was located in a sleek, modern building just blocks from the theater, overlooking the vibrant pulse of the city. There, filtered and clean, smelled faintly of fresh paint and expensive wood. The furniture was minimalist, elegant, chosen with an eye for understated luxury. A fully stocked refrigerator, a gleaming espresso machine, a bathroom with heated floors that melted the tension from her tired feet. It was a golden cage, undeniably. Every comfort was provided, every need anticipated, yet it underscored the undeniable truth: she was no longer her own. She was claimed. Each morning, the same silent driver appeared, chauffeuring her to the Grand Majestic. The theater was now a hive of activity, a symphony of hammers, drills, and shouted instructions. Dante's men, a quiet, efficient army of contractors and security personnel, swarmed the place, tearing down the decaying layers of Silas's neglect. Alera, armed with her blueprints and a new sense of purpose, found herself at the helm, the undisputed creative lead. She designed with a fierce passion she hadn't known she possessed, breathing life into a dying dream. Walls came down, stages expanded, lighting rigs became miracles of modern technology. This was her vision, finally taking shape, and it was glorious. But beneath the exhilarating rush of creation, an electric current of awareness hummed. Dante Alessio was a constant, unsettling presence. He wouldn't appear for days, then would suddenly materialize in a cavernous main hall, standing quietly in the shadows of the mezzanine, observing her. His presence was a subtle shift in the air, a drop in temperature, a hush among the workers. Alera would feel his gaze before she saw him, a prickling sensation on her skin, drawing her eyes inevitably to his dark, unreadable form. One afternoon, as she meticulously oversaw the restoration of the theater's intricate ceiling frescoes, a terse shout from the construction foreman reverberated through the hall. "Hey, you. Get back to your section." Alera turned to see a burly worker, reeking of stale beer, attempting to pilfer a box of antique brass fixtures. Before she could react, Dante's voice, a low, dangerous growl, cut through the noise. "Leave it." He stood just a few feet away, seemingly having materialized from thin air. His suit, as always, was immaculate, contrasting sharply with the dust and grime of the construction site. His gaze, colder than polar ice, fixed on a trembling worker. The man paled, dropping the box with a clatter. Dante didn't raise his voice, didn't move an inch, yet the sheer force of his presence was palpable. "You're done here," he stated, the words clipped, absolute. One of his security men, a hulking figure named Marco, appeared instantly, guiding the worker towards the exit with a firm, unforgiving grip. The incident was over in seconds, a brutal, silent lesson delivered without a single raised voice or direct threat from Dante himself. Alara watched, mesmerized and horrified. This was the dark side of his protection, the ruthless efficiency that ensured her vision could flourish unimpeded. He didn't just remove obstacles, he vaporized them. A shiver of apprehension, mixed with a strange, forbidden fascination, ran through her. Yet there were other moments, quieter, more baffling. Once, after a particularly grueling day, she returned to her new apartment to find a steaming hot meal waiting on her counter. Pasta arrabbiata, rich and spicy, her favorite. Another time, the temperature had plummeted unexpectedly, and as she left the theater, a thick cashmere coat, impossibly soft, was draped over her shoulders by her silent driver, a gesture clearly orchestrated by Dante. These were small things, almost imperceptible, yet they spoke of an acute attention, a quiet understanding of her needs that was both unsettling and profoundly comforting. She found herself, against her better judgment, seeking him out, not directly, but in the subtle details of his world. His private office, a sanctuary within the Crimson Club, was a masterpiece of understated design. Leather-bound books lined shelves, not just decorative, but clearly well-read. A single exquisite marble sculpture, abstract and powerful, sat on his desk. She noticed a hidden love for order, for beauty, for lines and forms that resonated with her own artistic sensibilities. It was a glimpse into a soul far more complex than the ruthless facade he presented. Their interactions became a dangerous dance. He would appear in her workshop, ostensibly to review progress, but his eyes would linger on her, assessing, consuming. The air would thicken, charged with an unspoken tension that made her breath catch. He rarely spoke much, a few terse questions about the budget or timeline, but his gaze, heavy and possessive, communicated volumes. She found herself drawn to him, a moth to a dangerous flame. The raw power he wielded, the absolute control he exerted, was terrifying, yes, but also undeniably attractive. He saw her not as a helpless seamstress, but as a force to be reckoned with, a creator worth protecting. One evening, he found her sketching late at the theater, the only light coming from her drafting lamp. He walked in, his footsteps impossibly silent on the newly polished floor. Alara stiffened, her pencil freezing mid-stroke. "Working late, Alara?" His voice, low and smooth, brushed against her skin. "There's much to be done," she replied, her voice a little too breathless. She didn't look up, afraid of what she might see in his eyes, or what he might read in hers. He came closer, his scent, cedar, whiskey, and something else, uniquely him, enveloping her. He leaned over her shoulder, his proximity electrifying. She could feel the warmth of his body, the subtle tension in his impeccably tailored suit. He looked at her sketch, a new design for a soaring glass atrium. "Bold," he murmured, his voice closer now, a low vibration that resonated through her. "You see beyond the brick and mortar. You see potential." His words, simple yet profound, sent a jolt through her. It was the deepest compliment she'd ever received, recognizing the very core of her artistic soul. She finally dared to look up, her eyes meeting his. His obsidian gaze held hers, unwavering, intense. In that moment, she was not invisible. She was seen, truly seen, for the first time in her life. And in his eyes, she saw not just danger, but a possessive admiration that thrilled her to her very core. She felt a magnetic pull, a dangerous attraction that defied all logic, all reason. He slowly straightened, breaking the spell, leaving a lingering warmth in his wake. "Don't overwork yourself, Alara. There's no need to rush perfection." He turned to leave, but paused at the threshold, his dark silhouette framed by the construction lights. "Tomorrow, I want to show you something. My personal collection. Perhaps it will inspire you further. It wasn't a request. It was a command, an invitation, and a promise all rolled into one. Alara knew, with a certainty that both terrified and excited her, that she was walking deeper into his world, into the heart of the Crimson Club, into the captivating enigma that was Dante Alessio. And she had no desire to turn back. The scent of fresh plaster and sawdust now mingled with the faint, lingering perfume of old wood in the Grand Majestic. The theater was transforming at an astonishing pace, a phoenix rising from the ashes of neglect under Alara's meticulous direction. Her new atrium design, a delicate interplay of glass and steel, was beginning to take shape, allowing the city's indifferent light to flood spaces that had long languished in shadow. For the first time in years, Alara felt truly alive, her vision manifesting in tangible forms. The constant hum of machinery, the shouts of the foreman, the clang of metal against metal, it was music to her ears. But even in this burgeoning masterpiece, a venomous whisper began to circulate. It started subtly, a raised eyebrow from a supplier, cold glance from a junior architect Alara had hired. Then came the anonymous emails sent to contractors and potential investors, questioning Alara's competence, hinting at unprofessional conduct, and even suggesting she was merely a puppet, her designs ghostwritten by some unseen hand. The worst were the whispers about her past, twisting her precarious immigration status into something sinister, implying she was a foreign opportunist exploiting the theater for personal gain. Alara dismissed them initially, chalking it up to jealousy. But the whispers grew louder, bolder. A crucial delivery of custom-milled glass was inexplicably delayed, threatening to throw the entire atrium construction off schedule. Then, a segment of her meticulously detailed lighting plan, the very heart of her immersive stage designs, was found digitally corrupted, utterly unusable. Her blood ran cold. This wasn't mere gossip. This was sabotage. She knew instinctively who was behind it. Mr. Silas. He might have been financially ruined and disappeared from the public eye, but his venomous spite clearly lingered. He was a serpent, wounded but still capable of striking from the shadows. The thought of him, still slithering in the periphery, watching her, plotting, sent a wave of nausea through her. She had thought herself free, but his lingering presence was a stark reminder of the fragile nature of her newfound world. One late afternoon, as Alara was inspecting the newly erected steel skeleton of the atrium, a sharp-faced reporter, clutching a crumpled printout, accosted her. "Miss Vance," the man snapped, his camera crew already filming, "sources allege you falsified permits for the Majestic's renovation, and that your so-called original designs bear striking resemblance to discarded concepts from a defunct local studio. Care to comment on these accusations of intellectual property theft and fraud?" The accusations, thrown like poison darts, hit their mark. Alara's breath hitched. Her carefully constructed composure shattered. The camera lights, usually exciting, now felt like invasive interrogations. Her mind raced, a scramble of indignation and rising panic. She tried to stammer a denial, but her voice was a thin, trembling thing against the reporter's aggressive onslaught. Just as the world threatened to close in, a calm, impossibly resonant voice cut through the chaos. "I believe Miss Vance has nothing to explain to the likes of you." Dante Alessio. He emerged from the shadows beneath the scaffolding, his presence a sudden, palpable force. His suit, as always, was immaculate, his dark hair a stark contrast to the dust-filled air. He moved with a languid grace that belied the lethal power radiating from him. The reporter, initially emboldened, visibly faltered, his mouth closing with an audible click. The camera lights, usually relentless, dimmed almost imperceptibly. Even the construction crew, usually boisterous, fell silent, their hammers stilled. Dante didn't look at Alara. His obsidian gaze, colder and sharper than any razor, was fixed solely on the reporter. "The permits are valid. The designs are original. Any further dissemination of false information will be met with the full force of my legal team. And believe me, they are far more tenacious than you are." His voice was low, controlled, yet each word was a precisely aimed missile, delivered with a chilling lack of emotion. There was no anger, No theatrical display. Just absolute, unyielding authority. The reporter, now a crumpled figure, stammered an apology, fumbling with his camera. Dante merely raised an eyebrow, a silent command that sent the entire crew scurrying away, their urgent chatter replaced by the pathetic whine of their retreating van. Alara stood, trembling, the adrenaline draining from her, leaving her weak-kneed. The sudden silence was almost as deafening as the earlier clamor. Dante finally turned to her, his gaze sweeping over her, assessing. He saw the faint tremor in her hands, the lingering fear in her wide eyes. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice softer now, though still holding an undercurrent of steel. She nodded, unable to speak, her throat tight. The sheer, effortless power he wielded was terrifying. He didn't shout, didn't threaten with overt violence, yet the message was crystal clear. Cross him, harm what he claims, and you will be erased. He led her away from the gaping maw of the atrium, towards his private office within the renovated Crimson Club, which was still undergoing its own discreet transformation. The journey was a blur, Alara's mind reeling with the implications of what she had just witnessed. Later, in the opulent quiet of his temporary office, Dante sat across from her, a single glass of amber liquid in his hand. The scent of cedar and whiskey filled the air. "Silas," he stated, his voice devoid of any inflection, "is no longer a concern." Alara's breath caught. What does that mean?" The words were barely a whisper. He took a slow sip of his drink, his eyes unblinking. "It means he attempted to interfere with a project that bears my name, and a woman under my protection. Such actions carry consequences." He didn't elaborate, didn't need to. Alara's imagination, fueled by the city's whispers, filled in the terrifying blanks. Silas wouldn't be found in a ditch. He'd simply cease to exist. His assets, his connections, his very identity, all would be systematically dismantled, leaving no trace. He would be a ghost, a cautionary tale whispered in the dark corners of the city. A wave of profound horror washed over her, chilling her to the bone. This man who provided her with a beautiful apartment, who championed her artistic vision, who protected her from the venomous world, was also a force of terrifying absolute destruction. He was a god in his own dark pantheon, and his wrath was silent, efficient, and irreversible. Yet, beneath the horror, a strange, undeniable sensation began to bloom, an intoxicating sense of safety. Absolute, unyielding safety. With Dante Alessio, no one would ever touch her again. No one would exploit her. No one would dare to threaten Lena. He was a shield, forged in fire and shadow, impenetrable and absolute. She stared at his profile, the sharp lines of his jaw, the unwavering intensity in his eyes. He was a monster, yes, but her monster. And in that terrifying, exhilarating moment, Alara felt a profound shift within her. Her fear of him was still present, a constant hum beneath her skin, but was now intertwined with a growing, bewildering sense of gratitude and something else, a dangerous, compelling admiration. She was dependent on him, utterly and completely. And a part of her, the part that had been so long exploited and dismissed, found a perverse, desperate comfort in that fact. "He won't bother you again," Dante said, his voice cutting through her turbulent thoughts. He leaned forward slightly, his gaze piercing, possessive. "No one will. You are under my protection, Alara." "Absolutely." His words, a quiet declaration of ownership, resonated deep within her. She was no longer just an exploited seamstress. She was a prized possession, guarded by a powerful, ruthless king. The thought should have terrified her, should have made her run screaming. Instead, it sent a shiver of profound satisfaction through her. She knew, with unsettling clarity, that she was inextricably bound to this man, to his world. And a dangerous curiosity, a craving for the depths of his shadowed soul, now burned brighter than any fear. She wanted to know everything. But she knew, too, that his protection came at a price she was slowly, willingly beginning to pay. The Grand Majestic was a living canvas under Alara's hand. Each day brought new triumphs, A fresh layer of life breathed into its historic bones. The atrium, now soaring and translucent, bathed the main hall in a breathtaking cascade of light. Yet, despite the exhilaration of creation, restless curiosity gnawed at Alara. Dante Alessio remained an enigma, a magnificent, terrifying shadow who controlled her world but revealed little of his own. One blustery afternoon, while searching for an old lighting schematic, Alara ventured into a forgotten wing beneath the stage, an area the renovation crew had inexplicably bypassed. The air grew heavy, thick with the scent of damp earth and forgotten things. The light filtering through the grimy windows was weak, painting the crumbling walls in shades of bruised gray. She pushed open a rickety, unlatched door, revealing a small, dusty room. It wasn't a storage closet. It was a study, abandoned and cloaked in a profound silence that spoke of interrupted dreams. Dust motes danced like tiny, sad spirits in the slivers of light. A worn wooden desk stood in the center, littered with desiccated inkwells and ancient, brittle parchment. But it was the walls that captured her breath, drawing her deeper into the room. They were covered, almost entirely, in sketches. Not theatrical designs, not financial ledgers, but architectural drawings. Her heart gave a violent lurch. These were magnificent. Intricate blueprints for soaring cathedrals, elegant bridges spanning impossible chasms, entire city blocks reimagined with daring curves and light-filled spaces. The lines were confident, precise, yet imbued with an almost poetic grace. Each drawing pulsed with an artistic soul, a fervent passion for creation that resonated with her own deepest desires. She traced a finger along the faded ink of a cantilevered library, its glass walls reaching for the sky. The sheer ambition, the profound beauty of these designs, they were breathtaking. She recognized the hand, even before she saw the faint, elegant initial D scrawled in the corner of one particularly complex urban redevelopment plan. This was Dante, the ruthless mafia boss, the silent, dangerous power that held her life in his iron grip, had once dreamed of building not empires of shadow, but structures of light. A profound understanding, sharp and sudden, pierced through her. He wasn't just a man of power. He was a man of lost potential, a soul trapped by circumstances. The realization resonated with her own suppressed dreams, her own quiet desperation. She felt an unexpected surge of empathy, a connection so visceral it stole her breath. She reached for a rolled-up scroll, careful not to disturb the fragile paper. It was a detailed rendering of a mixed-use development, strikingly similar in its communal focus to the project Isabella had described in the original story: ground-floor markets, daycare, rooftop gardens. It wasn't just building, it was community. It was hope. The irony was almost unbearable. A low voice, soft as falling dust yet sharp with command, cut through the heavy silence. "That room is off-limit, Alara." Alara spun around, the scroll slipping from her trembling fingers. Dante stood in the doorway, a dark silhouette against the meager light. His eyes, usually unreadable, held a flicker of something she couldn't quite decipher. Surprise, perhaps, or a deep, vulnerable anger. He was dressed in his customary impeccably tailored suit, but in this forgotten room, surrounded by ghosts of his past, he seemed less like a formidable dawn and more like a man burdened by an invisible weight. "Dante," she breathed, her voice barely a whisper. "Ah, I found these." She gestured around the room, her hand shaking slightly. "They're beautiful. Your designs." He remained silent for a long moment, his gaze sweeping over the room, then settling back on her, cold and assessing. The air grew thick with unspoken tension. Alara braced herself for his anger, for the reprimand for her trespass. But it never came. Instead, a profound sigh escaped him, a sound so raw, so filled with weariness, that it startled her. He walked further into the room, his footsteps disturbingly silent on the dusty floorboards. He stopped beside her, his proximity overwhelming her senses. The familiar scent of cedar and expensive linen, the faint underlying aroma of something darker, more primal. His eyes, when they met hers, held a startling vulnerability. They were he said, his voice low, gravelly. A long time ago. Before. He trailed off, his gaze drifting to a sketch of a soaring bridge, elegant and strong. Why did you stop? She asked, daring to speak the question that burned in her soul. He laughed, a harsh, humorless sound that scraped against the edges of her heart. Family, Alara. Family demands. My father, he saw structure not in steel and glass, but in loyalty and blood. He built his empire not with blueprints, but with promises and threats. He wanted lawyers. He wanted soldiers. He got a son who saw beauty and symmetry and light. He turned from the sketches, his back to the wall, his posture radiating a profound weariness she'd never seen before. Dreams don't always survive inheritance. Sometimes the legacy you're born into, it consumes the one you choose. His confession, so stark and unvarnished, resonated deeply with her own struggles. I understand, she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Mr. Silas, he tried to do the same to me. To steal my designs, to control my future, to use my sister's illness as leverage. She found herself sharing, almost unconsciously, the raw, aching fear she carried for Lena, the suffocating guilt that sometimes threatened to drown her. Sometimes I wonder if I'll ever truly be free to create what's in my heart without someone else owning a piece of it. He looked at her then, truly looked, his dark eyes softening, reflecting a flicker of understanding. Freedom is an illusion, Alara, especially for people like us. We're always bound to family, to duty, to consequence. He paused, his gaze intensifying. But choice, you can still choose how you are bound. And to whom? The air between them crackled, charged with unspoken meanings. His words were a confession, a challenge, and an offer. He was saying he saw her not just as his protege, but as a kindred spirit, someone who understood the invisible chains that bound him. He reached out, his hand moving slowly, deliberately, and gently brushed a stray strand of hair from her cheek. His touch was feather-light, yet it sent a jolt of pure electricity through her, making her breath catch in her throat. His fingers lingered, warm against her skin, a fragile bridge between their two worlds. You, he murmured, his voice now a low, intimate rumble. You have a fire within you, Alara. A fierce, untamed passion that refuses to be extinguished. His thumb stroked her cheekbone, a tender, possessive gesture that made her whole body hum. My father would have called it a weakness. I call it strength. Her eyes locked with his, wide and luminous. She saw the raw emotion swirling in their depths, a hunger, a longing he rarely showed. The mask he wore, the impenetrable facade of the mafia boss, seemed to crack, revealing the wounded man beneath. She leaned into his touch, an instinctive, unthinking surrender. Their gazes held, locked in a silent confession. The longing was a palpable force, stretching between them, pulling them inexorably closer. She could feel his breath, warm and spiced, on her lips. Every nerve ending in her body sang. The air was thick with unarticulated desires, with the weight of shared pasts and uncertain futures. Then, slowly, hesitantly, Dante leaned in. His lips, firm and warm, brushed hers, a tentative whisper of a kiss. It was soft, exploratory, yet it held an undeniable undercurrent of fierce possession, a promise of something far more potent. Alara gasped, her eyes fluttering shut, her own lips parting slightly in an invitation. In that fleeting moment, surrounded by the ghosts of his architectural dreams, their separate worlds seemed to merge, if only for a heartbeat. This wasn't just chemistry. It was the recognition of two scarred souls, finally finding solace in each other's shadows. The kiss deepened, a slow burn that promised an inferno, a dangerous invitation to a bond she knew would forever change her. She was his undeniably. And in that terrifying, exhilarating realization, she wanted nothing more than to be claimed. The Grand Majestic was a symphony of progress, its cavernous spaces echoing with a purposeful clang of steel and the rich thrum of anticipation. Alara, amidst the organized chaos, found herself in a dizzying state of exhilaration and unease. The atrium, a dazzling cathedral of light, was nearly complete, a testament to her vision and Dante's unwavering and terrifyingly absolute backing. Their shared kiss, that soft, hesitant whisper of a promise in the forgotten architectural study, had woven a new thread into the fabric of her being, a dangerous warmth that pulsed beneath her skin. She found herself craving his presence, his unsettling gaze, the unique safety his dark world provided. Yet an icy tendril of fear still coiled around her heart, a constant reminder of Lena. Her sister, fragile and sweet, was slowly improving, thanks to the discreet top-tier medical care Dante had arranged. But the fear remained. What if Dante's world, with its unseen enemies and brutal demands, eventually reached for Lena? Alara wanted to carve out a space of absolute safety for her sister, a sanctuary untouched by the shadows that now clung to her own life. It was this yearning that made her vulnerable. The message arrived discreetly, slipped under her apartment door, nestled within a bouquet of wilting lilies, a stark contrast to Dante's vibrant roses. No sender, no explicit return address, just a single, elegantly typed note. Miss Vance, a shadow approaches Lena. I possess critical information regarding her future safety, free from Alessio's entanglements. For her true freedom, discretion is paramount. Meet me tonight, midnight, Old Harrington Mill, Dock Street. Alone. A mutual friend of Silas. The words chilled her to the bone. A mutual friend of Silas. The serpent, even vanquished, still cast a long, venomous shadow. And the mention of Lena, the implied threat, struck directly at her deepest fear. Her first instinct was to go straight to Dante, to hand him the note, to let his power crush this new, insidious threat. But the line, free from Alessio's entanglements, held her back. Could there be a way, a genuine path, to secure Lena's independence, a life untouched by the blood and shadows that now define her own? A life where Lena wasn't merely a protected asset, but truly free? The desire, fierce and desperate, warred with her burgeoning trust in Dante. Discretion is paramount. The warning echoed, playing on her lingering need for independent solutions, her deep-seated belief that she could still carve out a measure of control for herself. Midnight. The Old Harrington Mill. A desolate, forgotten relic of the city's industrial past, far from the gleaming towers and bustling streets that Dante Alessio claimed. The wind off the river carried the metallic tang of salt and decay, whipping her hair around her face as she stepped out of the anonymous taxi. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage of doubt and dread. She had left her phone, as instructed, in her apartment. She was utterly alone. The massive brick facade of the mill loomed, black and silent against the bruised purple of the night sky. Broken windows stared like vacant eyes, reflecting the dim glow of distant streetlights. The air was thick with the scent of stagnant water, rust, and something else, something cold and metallic like fear. "Hello?" she called out, her voice a thin, reedy whisper swallowed by the vast empty space. Only the creak of rusty metal and the mournful groan of the wind answered her. A shiver, colder than the night air, traced its way down her spine. A gnawing unease began to curdle in her stomach. This felt wrong. Terribly, utterly wrong. She stepped inside the gaping maw of a service entrance, the rusted door groaning a protest as she pushed it open. The interior was a vast, cavernous space, a labyrinth of decaying machinery and skeletal support beams. Dust motes danced in the slivers of moonlight that pierced the broken roof. Each step she took echoed unervingly, amplifying the frantic beat of her own pulse. "Anyone here?" She tried again, her voice stronger this time, laced with a desperate edge. A sudden sharp movement in her peripheral vision. A shadow detaching itself from the deeper darkness. Before she could react, before she could even scream, a rough hand clamped over her mouth, another snatched her arms, twisting them painfully behind her back. The world spun. A thick, coarse fabric was shoved into her mouth, gagging her. The metallic taste of fear, raw and bitter, filled her mouth. She struggled, kicking, twisting, a frantic animal caught in a snare. But her attackers were swift, brutal and efficient. There were two of them, large, hulking figures whose faces were obscured by the gloom and heavy hoods. Their hands, calloused and strong, bound her wrists with chilling expertise, then her ankles. The struggle was over almost before it began. She was hoisted unceremoniously into the back of a van. Darkness enveloped her, absolute and suffocating. The air was stale, smelling of oil and sweat. The van lurched, then sped off, the rhythmic hum of its engine a menacing lullaby that vibrated through her bound body. Each bump in the road sent jolts of pain through her wrists, but it was the icy grip of terror that truly consumed her. She had walked straight into a trap, a stupid, naive lamb led to the slaughter, all for a desperate hope for Lena's freedom. Hours later, or perhaps only minutes, time had become a meaningless blur. The van shuddered to a halt. The rear doors creaked open, flooding her eyes with a harsh, blinding light. Rough hands pulled her out, dragging her through a series of dark, damp corridors. The air here was heavy with the smell of stale water, rust, and something else, something cloying and sickly sweet that made her stomach churn. They finally shoved her into a small, concrete room. The heavy metal door clanged shut, the sound echoing like a death knell. A single naked bulb, hanging precariously from the ceiling, cast a sickly yellow glow over the barren space. The walls were rough, stained with what looked like ancient damp. A thin, worn blanket lay crumpled in one corner. There was nothing else. Her wrists were still bound, though not so tightly as to cut off circulation, suggesting they wanted her conscious alive. But her ankles had been freed. They wanted her to feel her imprisonment, to understand her helplessness. Panic, cold and nauseating, clawed at her throat. Lena, she tried to scream, but the gag muffled the sound, turning it into a pathetic whimper. Her sister. What happened to Lena now? Had they hurt her? Was this whole charade a prelude to something far more sinister involving her innocent sister? The thought twisted her gut, a burning agony. Regret, sharp and bitter, overwhelmed her. She had been so foolish, so incredibly naive. She had allowed herself to be lulled by Dante's promises, by his dangerous allure, only to foolishly chase after a phantom of freedom, dragging herself deeper into the very world she had hoped to escape. The kiss, the shared secrets, the warmth of his hand, had all been a trick? A way to ensure her loyalty, to keep her close before the trap snapped shut? She sank to the cold concrete floor, her body trembling uncontrollably. Despair, heavy and suffocating, pressed down on her. Don, would he come for her? Would he even know she was gone? He was a mafia boss, a man who dealt in shadows and power. Would she, a mere costume designer, a forgotten dream weaver, be worth the risk, the potential war? The thought that he might simply abandon her, deeming her a disposable liability, was a torment far worse than any physical pain. He had claimed her, yes, but what did that truly mean to a man like him? The heavy metal door creaked open again. A man stepped in, his face obscured by shadow, but his voice was chillingly familiar. Cold, sneering. Well, if it isn't the little seamstress. Alessio's newest toy. He chuckled, a cruel, grating sound. You picked the wrong side, girl. Or rather, Alessio picked the wrong girl. He thinks he can hide his weaknesses. We're here to prove him wrong. He leaned in, his breath, foul and stale, washing over her. He'll come for you eventually. That's the game. But by the time he gets here, you'll wish he hadn't. He delivered the words with a chilling certainty that made her blood run cold. He laughed again, a sound devoid of mirth, then turned and walked out. The heavy door clanged shut, plunging Alara back into the suffocating darkness, leaving her alone with the echo of his taunts and the horrifying realization that she was merely bait, a pawn in a deadly game. Her greatest fear was confirmed. She was here not because she was a threat, but because she was Dante's weakness. And they intended to exploit that weakness until there was nothing left of either of them. She squeezed her eyes shut, a silent scream tearing through her. The dark, inescapable truth was that she was now fully and completely immersed in Dante Alessio's ruthless world, It was about to consume her. The wilting lilies lay, discarded on Alara's kitchen counter, their sickly sweet scent now a harbinger of doom. Dante Alessio stared at the empty space where Alara's phone should have been, his jaw rigid, every muscle in his body coiled with a terrifying stillness. He knew with a primal certainty that clawed at his gut. The note, found crushed in the wastebasket by Marco, had been a taunt, a deliberate lure designed to exploit Alara's compassion, her fierce loyalty to her sister. A mutual friend of Silas. He recognized the signature of a rival faction, the Caitiators, men who dealt in petty cruelties and desperate gambles, men who had felt Silas's lingering resentment and seen an opportunity. Rage, cold and absolute, began to simmer in Dante's veins. It wasn't the volatile, explosive anger of a common thug. It was the calculated, lethal fury of a predator whose most prized possession had been snatched. Alara. His Alara. He had seen the nascent trust in her eyes, felt the tender surrender of her lips, uncovered the hidden architect within her. She was not merely a protege. She was his anchor, his growing obsession, the fragile light in his shadowed world. And they had dared to touch her. Find her, he commanded Marco, his voice a low, dangerous growl that promised unimaginable retribution. Every camera, every contact, every whisper in the city. She left her phone. She went alone. Find the van. Find them. The city became Dante's personal chessboard, and he moved his pieces with brutal efficiency. His penthouse, usually a sanctuary of quiet power, transformed into a frenetic command center. Monitors flickered with surveillance footage. Maps of the city glowed with pulsing red dots, and the air crackled with the urgency of encrypted comms. He didn't sleep. He didn't eat. He ran on pure, unadulterated obsession, his mind a labyrinth of cold logic and murderous intent. He saw the grainy footage, Alara, a small, resolute figure, hailing a cab in the rain. Then the black van, nondescript, melting into the pre-dawn traffic near Dock Street. The old Harrington mill. A chill of recognition, then a surge of white-hot fury. It was a known Caitiator stronghold, a decaying labyrinth near the river. A place where things went in and rarely came out. Prepare the men, Dante ordered, his voice sharper than a scalpel. No subtlety. No negotiations. We go in hard. We take everything. The journey to the mill was a blur of speed and controlled chaos. Dante rode in the lead vehicle, his hand resting on the cold steel of his customized Beretta. The rain had subsided, leaving the street slick and reflecting the harsh glare of the city's indifferent lights. His men, a dozen elite enforcers, silent and grim-faced, followed in a convoy of black SUVs. They knew the stakes. They knew the wrath of Dante Alessio when roused. As they approached Dock Street, the air grew thick with the smell of brine and industrial decay. The Harrington Mill loomed, a hulking, skeletal monstrosity against the paling pre-dawn sky. Its broken windows seemed to leer, mocking his forced patience. Dante felt the thrum of blood in his ears, a primal call to violence. He had spent his life controlling his emotions, wielding power with cold precision. But this was different. This was visceral. Perimeter secured, Marco's voice crackled through his earpiece. 2 lookouts, both neutralized. Entry points clear. Good, Dante grated. Move in. Silent until I give the word. I want the ones who touched her alive. For me. The command was absolute. His men moved like ghosts, breaching the old mill from multiple entry points. Dante, a dark blur of controlled fury, led the main assault through the main service entrance. The heavy steel door groaned open, revealing a cavernous interior, a wasteland of rusted machinery, decaying gantries, and shadows stretching like grasping claws. The air was stale, heavy with the scent of dust, metal, and something else, a faint, sickly, sweet odor that made his stomach clench. Fear. Her fear. He moved through the mill with ruthless efficiency, his eyes scanning every shadow, every corner. His Beretta, equipped with a suppressor, was a natural extension of his arm. A grunt, a muffled thud. One of his men had taken down a sentry. No wasted movements. No unnecessary noise. The silence itself was a weapon. Level 2 clear, came a whisper through his comms. Moving to level 3. Dante climbed a winding, rusted staircase, each creak of metal a testament to the mill's decay, a stark contrast to the thundering rage in his chest. He pushed through a door, finding himself in a maze of narrow, corrugated iron corridors. The faint hum of a generator reached his ears. A flicker of light. He was close. Suddenly, a figure burst from a doorway, a burly caitiator enforcer, startled, raising his weapon. Dante didn't hesitate. 2 precise shots. The man crumpled, a silent heap on the dirty floor. No emotion. No remorse. Just the grim satisfaction of eliminating an obstacle. He kicked open the door, his eyes sweeping the room. It was a makeshift command center, filled with screens showing static surveillance feeds. 3 more men, 2 armed with shotguns, 1 with a crude pistol, were caught off guard. Where is she? Dante's voice was a low snarl, barely recognizable. One of the men, a gaunt figure with a cruel smirk, laughed. She's enjoying her stay, Alessio. A little bird in a cage. We wanted to see if the great Dante would dirty his hands for a mere seamstress. The smirk vanished as Dante moved. He was a whirlwind of controlled violence, a brutal ballet of fists and elbows. The first man went down with a broken jaw, the shotgun clattering. The second, larger, tried to bring his weapon to bear, but Dante was faster, disarming him with a sickening crunch of bone, then slamming his head against the concrete wall with a force that rendered him unconscious. The third, the one who had spoken, tried to flee, but Dante's hand shot out, grabbing him by the collar, slamming him against the wall. Where is Alara? Each word was punctuated by a tightening grip, a subtle squeeze that threatened to crush the man's windpipe. Level 4, the man choked out, eyes wide with terror. East Wing, the last cell. Dante released him with a shove that sent him sprawling. Marco. Level 4, East Wing. Move. He bounded up another set of stairs, his heart a furious drumbeat against his ribs. He felt her. He could almost taste her fear in the stale air. His possessiveness, usually a controlled force, had erupted into an inferno. He would burn this entire city to the ground if it meant getting her back. He burst onto level 4, a long dark corridor lined with identical metal doors. The air here was colder, damper. He moved systematically, kicking open each door, his eyes searching, a desperate, feral urgency driving him. Then the last door. It was slightly ajar. A thin, sickly yellow light spilled from within. He pushed it open. And there she was, Alara. She was huddled on the cold concrete floor, her wrists still bound, her hair tangled, her face streaked with dirt and terror. Her eyes, wide and luminous with fear, snapped up, locking onto his. A silent gasp escaped her lips, quickly stifled by the gag. She was trembling, a fragile, broken bird, but her gaze, even in her terror, held a flicker of desperate hope. For a split second, the world went utterly silent. Dante felt a wave of profound relief, so intense it was almost painful, washing over him, followed immediately by a surge of renewed, incandescent rage directed at every single soul who had dared to touch her, to imprison her. He saw the bruising on her wrists, the tears staining her cheeks, the raw fear in her beautiful eyes. It was a desecration. Alara, he growled, his voice raw, hoarse with emotion he rarely allowed himself to show. He was across the room in 2 long strides, dropping to his knees beside her. His beretta clattered to the floor, forgotten. His hands, usually so capable of inflicting pain, were surprisingly gentle as he tore the gag from her mouth. Her choked gasp filled the silence. He quickly unfastened the crude bonds from her wrists, his fingers brushing her raw skin, eliciting a soft whimper of pain from her. He ignored it, his eyes scanning every inch of her, searching for any sign of deeper injury. His gaze was fierce, possessive, desperate. Are you hurt? He demanded, his voice rough with a primal intensity. Tell me you're not hurt. She shook her head, unable to form words, only managing a choked sob of pure, overwhelming relief. Her small, trembling hands reached out, clutching at the front of his expensive suit, her fingers digging into the fabric. She was here. He was here. He had come. Dante pulled her into his arms, crushing her against his chest, holding her with a fierce, almost violent tenderness. Her face was buried in his shoulder, her body shaking with silent sobs. He inhaled her scent, faint and sweet, mingled with the stale air of her captivity, and felt a shudder run through him, an almost unbearable tenderness for this fragile, resilient woman. He ran his hand over her tangled hair, down her back, reassuring himself that she was real, she was whole. My Alara, he whispered, his voice thick with a possessiveness that vibrated deep in her soul. My little bird. They will pay. Every single one of them. His gaze, still burning with protective fury, swept around the desolate room, then narrowed, focusing on the sounds of approaching footsteps and muffled gunfire from the corridor. More of them. He reached down, grabbing his Beretta from the floor. He held Alara tighter against him with one arm, his other hand raising the weapon. It's not over yet, he grated, his eyes promising a symphony of retribution. But you are safe. With me. No. Always. He pulled her closer, pressing a fierce, urgent kiss to her temple, a brand of ownership. He would tear this place apart, limb from limb, to ensure she was truly free. And the world would burn for daring to lay a hand on what was undeniably his. The journey back from the Harrington Mill was a blur of protective darkness and whispered commands. Alara clung to Dante, his scent a comforting anchor of cedar, whiskey, and the metallic tang of gunpowder, filling her lungs. His body, hard and unyielding, was a fortress around her. She felt the constant pressure of his arm, the vigilant sweep of his gaze, even in the confines of the armored car. She was safe. The sheer, overwhelming relief of it left her weak, tears silently tracing paths through the grime on her cheeks. They arrived not at her apartment, but at Dante's penthouse, a sanctuary of muted luxury high above the city. Marco, his face grim, and a discreet, stern-faced woman who introduced herself as Dr. Rossi were waiting. Alara was gently, but firmly, ushered into a lavish bathroom. Dr. Rossi, with calm efficiency, examined her, her movements professional and reassuring. There were no major injuries, only bruising on her wrists, superficial scrapes, and the deep, pervasive tremor that had taken root in her soul. While Dr. Rossi tended to her physical wounds, Dante stood by the bathroom door, a silent sentinel. He didn't come in, didn't invade her space, but his presence was a palpable, unshakable force. She could feel his gaze, a weight of intense, possessive concern that burned through the closed door. The thought that he hadn't left, that he was there, a guardian in the face of the storm, was a strange, potent balm to her shattered nerves. After a long, scalding shower that washed away the grit and grime of her captivity, Alara found fresh clothes laid out for her, soft silk pajamas, impossibly luxurious, smelling faintly of clean linen. She emerged, her body feeling less violated, but her mind still reeling. Dante was waiting in the expansive living room, bathed in the soft, ambient glow of the city lights. He had changed too, his clothes crisp, but the faint bruise under his eye and the clenching of his jaw betrayed the violent night. He moved towards her, his eyes sweeping over her, a deep, possessive hunger in their depths. Are you all right? He asked, his voice rough, as if he distrusted the words, needing to confirm for himself. Alara nodded, finding her voice a fragile whisper. Physically, yes. Mentally, I don't know. The images of the dark room, the crude threats, the overwhelming despair flashed behind her eyes. A shudder ran through her. Dante reached out, his hand gently cupping her jaw, tilting her face up. His thumb brushed over her cheekbone, a tender, possessive caress. They did not touch you, he stated, not a question, but a fierce declaration. No, she confirmed, meeting his intense gaze. Only the fear. The feeling of being prey. His jaw tightened, a muscle jumping. That ends now. His eyes, usually unreadable obsidian, blazed with a cold, righteous fury. They dared to touch what is mine. They dared to make you fear. That is a debt they cannot repay with mere blood. He settled her onto a plush sofa, then sat beside her, closer than he ever had before. The warmth of his body radiated into hers, a comforting heat against the lingering chill of terror. He didn't ask her for details, he simply was. He brought her a mug of warm, fragrant herbal tea, his strong fingers brushing hers as she took it. He watched her drink, his gaze unwavering, a silent promise of unwavering vigilance. He was not just beside her, he was inside her recovery. Every breath she took, every tremor that shook her was reflected in the tightening of his eyes, the almost imperceptible clench of his fist. For the next few days, Dante remained a constant, formidable presence. He barely left the penthouse. Meetings were brought to him, his communications conducted in hushed tones behind a closed study door. He ate little, slept less, his focus entirely on her, and on the retribution he was orchestrating. Alara saw him, often late at night, staring out at the city skyline, his profile etched against the glittering lights, a man consumed by a silent, deadly purpose. The city, meanwhile, began to hum with a new kind of silence. Whispers of the Caitiator faction began to die out. Their operations, once bold and brazen, became erratic, then non-existent. News reports, vague and sanitized, spoke of restructuring in certain underground enterprises, of sudden disappearances and shifts in power. No names were mentioned, no arrests made public. But Alara knew. Dante was moving. He was dismantling, piece by agonizing piece, the world that had dared to threaten her. One evening, as Alara watched the sunset paint the sky in fiery hues, Dante entered the living room, his face taut, his eyes dark with residual battle. He came to her, standing before her, his posture radiating an air of finality. "It is done," he stated, his voice low, devoid of triumph, merely fact. "The Caitiators, they will trouble no one again. No one will ever use." Months melted into a whirlwind of relentless dedication, meticulous artistry, and the quiet, unwavering presence of Dante. The city, once indifferent to the grand majestic's decay, now buzzed with fervent anticipation. The old theater, once a skeletal husk, had been reborn, not merely restored, but reimagined under Alara's visionary hand. Its grand opening was not just an event. It was a defiant statement, a promise to a city yearning for beauty. The night of the unveiling was electric. A crimson carpet stretched from the street to the gleaming, newly polished brass doors, reflecting the kaleidoscope of flashing cameras and elegant evening wear. The facade of the Grand Majestic, bathed in a soft, golden glow, seemed to breathe with renewed life, its intricate carvings brought back to their former glory. The air thrummed with a low murmur of anticipation, the clinking of champagne flutes, and the sweet, dizzying scent of fresh flowers. Alara stood by the newly unveiled marquee, her name, Alara Vance, artistic director, boldly emblazoned in elegant script above the theaters. She wore a gown of rich, deep emerald silk, a creation of her own design, that flowed around her like liquid light, reflecting the strength and serenity she now carried. Her hair, usually swept up in a practical knot, cascaded in soft waves around her shoulders, framing a face radiant with pride and a quiet, profound joy. Her hands, once perpetually stained with dye and pricked by needles, now held a delicate glass of sparkling wine, perfectly steady. She was no longer the exploited seamstress. She was a luminary, a visionary, standing on the precipice of a dream fully realized. From the edge of the throng, partially obscured by a velvet rope and a cluster of impeccably dressed security personnel, Dante Alessio watched her. He was a dark, formidable presence in his charcoal suit, his gaze, as always, an intense, possessive heat that reached across the distance and settled upon her. A subtle shift had occurred within him since the mill. The edge of ruthlessness was still there, a core of unyielding steel, but was tempered now by a quiet contentment, a profound sense of pride that softened the sharp lines of his face. His lips, usually a thin, unsmiling line, held a faint, almost imperceptible curve. She was his creation, his redemption, and the depth of his possessiveness was a tangible force in the air around him. A gentle tug on Alara's hand. Lena, her eyes wide with wonder, grinned up at her. Her sister, vibrant and healthy, her cheeks rosy, her laughter bubbling like a clear spring, was a living testament to the battles Alara had fought, to the sacrifices made. She wore a dress Alara had designed, a miniature version of elegance, and clutched a small, plush teddy bear. Lena looked up at the glittering chandelier, then back at Alara, her admiration shining bright. "It's beautiful, Alara. You made it truly shine." Alara squeezed her sister's hand, a warmth spreading through her chest that rivaled the champagne. This was it. This was the peace she had fought for, the future she had envisioned. Lena safe, her art thriving. Inside, the transformed auditorium was breathtaking. The newly installed state-of-the-art stage glowed, waiting to host wonders. The renovated Crimson Club, no longer a shadowy den, operated with a discreet, legitimate elegance, its profits now channeled into the arts foundation Alara had established. Later, as the final speeches ended and the initial rush subsided, Alara found herself drawn, inevitably, to Dante. He met her gaze across the crowded room, a silent invitation, a promise of privacy. With a subtle nod to Marco, he guided her through a less frequented door, up a narrow, winding staircase that led to the highest point of the theater, the newly completed rooftop garden, a hidden oasis amidst the urban sprawl. The city unfurled beneath them, a glittering tapestry of light stretching to the horizon. The wind, surprisingly soft at this height, whispered secrets through the newly planted rosemary bushes. The scent of fresh earth and night-blooming jasmine filled the air. Alara leaned against the cool stone railing, her gown rippling around her, her heart swelling with an almost unbearable fullness. Dante stepped behind her, his arms encircling her waist, pulling her back against his solid chest. His chin rested on her shoulder, his breath warm against her ear. The subtle scent of his expensive cologne, mingled with the lingering hint of cedar, enveloped her. It was a familiar embrace, a claim she now welcomed, cherished. "You build hope, Alara," he murmured, his voice low, intimate, resonating through her. "Out of ruin, out of shadows." She reached back, her hands covering his, her fingers intertwining with his strong, scarred ones. "We built it," she corrected softly, remembering his abandoned blueprints, his own silent dreams. "Together." He turned her gently to face him, his hands cupping her face, his gaze deep and unwavering, reflecting the myriad lights of the city. "When I met you," he began, his voice rough with emotion, "I saw a fragile bird trapped. I saw only a means to an end, another debt to collect." He paused, his thumb stroking her cheekbone. "You showed me that some dreams, once buried, can bloom again. You showed me what true strength is. Not in taking, but in creating." His eyes, those obsidian pools, softened further, filled with an intensity that stole her breath. "My world was a cage, Alara. A gilded, endless prison of power and shadows. You are my door, my redemption. And what's on the other side of that door?" she whispered, her voice trembling slightly with the weight of the moment. He smiled then, a genuine, breathtaking smile that reached his eyes, illuminating them with a warmth she rarely saw. "Home," he said simply, his thumb tracing the curve of her lip. Their lips met then, slowly, surely. Not with the frantic urgency of their first kiss, but with a profound depth that spoke of promises kept, of futures intertwined. It was a kiss of belonging, of absolute certainty, of a love forged in the crucible of darkness and light. There was no fire this time, only warmth, a steady, comforting burn that settled deep into her soul, binding them together eternally. When they parted, Alara's eyes were luminous with unshed tears, but her smile was wide, unburdened. She leaned her head against his shoulder, looking out at the city glittering beneath them, the Grand Majestic standing tall, a beacon of their improbable journey. "So what now?" she asked, her voice light, free, filled with the boundless possibilities of their shared future. Dante's hand slipped into hers, his fingers intertwining, a silent, powerful claim. Now, he said, his gaze sweeping the endless horizon, we keep building dreams, legacies, a life that shines so brightly no shadow can ever touch it again. Below them, the city pulsed with renewed vigor, a testament to resilience, to transformation. Alara knew, with a certainty that settled deep in her bones, that some wrong turns don't lead to dead ends. They lead to destiny. And as the night embraced steel and glass, Isabella Cruz and Lorenzo Duca watched their world shine, a proof that even in a city built on shadows, love could still draw the brightest line. Isn't it profound how our true worth can ignite a fire in the most unexpected places, even when we feel utterly invisible and exploited? Alara's journey reminds us that past hurts don't define our future. Sometimes it takes a love as fierce and absolute as Dante's, willing to tear down empires for your sake, to build the life we truly deserve, a life bathed in the light of our own magnificent dreams. You are worthy of a love that sees your deepest desires and fights for them, even when you can't. If this story resonated, reminding you of your inner strength, please like this video. Subscribe to join a community that believes love heals and transforms. Comment, I am seen, and let us know your heart felt this journey.